1607. Over 100 English settlers arrive in a mysterious, swamp-filled land, dreaming of gold and glory. But the rivers are poisoned, the mosquitoes are relentless, and famine is waiting behind every tree. Starvation, disease, and deadly attacks from native warriors push Jamestown to the edge of extinction. Could these desperate men survive? Or was this the end of England's first American colony? Discover the shocking story of struggle, betrayal, and survival that would lay the foundations of a nation. Imagine the Atlantic in winter 1606, 3 small wooden ships, the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery, struggling against waves, carrying 104 English men and boys who were not pilgrims or families, but adventurous soldiers, and gentlemen chasing dreams sold by the Virginia Company of London. Gold, riches, and empire. After 4 months of storms, sickness, and near starvation, land finally appeared Chesapeake Bay, where they planted a cross and named it Cape Henry. Honoring the king's son, they sailed further inland up a wide river, naming it the James, and 40 miles upstream chose a swampy peninsula to settle, believing it would be easy to defend against Spanish attacks. They named it Jamestown and began building a triangular fort with sharpened logs and cannons, filled with hope and ambition, but blind to the dangers of brackish water, disease, and mosquitoes that swarmed the swamp. Instead of planting crops, they dug in the dirt for gold, filling barrels with worthless rocks, while few had the skills or foresight to grow food. Outside the fort, the Powhatan Confederacy. 30 tribes led by Chief Powhatan watched silently, wary of these intruders on their land. Among the settlers, Captain John Smith, a fiery soldier, realized survival required discipline and hard work, warning, "He that will not work shall not eat." Yet most ignored him, blinded by visions of quick riches. By summer, reality struck, sickness spread like wildfire, men fell ill, and by autumn nearly half of the original settlers were dead. Yet hope persisted as they raised England's flag over the fort, believing they were planting the seed of a mighty empire. Unbeknownst to them, Jamestown teetered on the edge of disaster, facing dangers from disease, starvation, and the unknown challenges of the New World, and only courage, cunning, and sheer luck would keep it alive long enough to become the birthplace of English America. By the summer of 60, the settlers of Jamestown were already beginning to realize that survival in this swampy wilderness would demand more than hope or dreams of gold, as heat, humidity, and relentless mosquitoes sapped their strength and courage, while the brackish river water poisoned the unprepared, sending many to their graves with fever, dysentery, or malaria. Yet amid this chaos, Captain John Smith emerged as a leader whose strict discipline would become Jamestown's lifeline, enforcing the rule that "He that will not work shall not eat," directing men to cut timber, dig wells, repair the fort, and plant food rather than chase imagined treasures. And though some of the gentlemen settlers despised his authority, their survival depended on him. For without food and order, the colony would have perished within months. Smith also understood that relations with the Powhatan Confederacy were vital, negotiating for corn and establishing fragile trade networks, but tension simmered, and when he was captured later that year by Powhatan warriors, only the intervention of Pocahontas, according to legend, saved his life and temporarily eased hostilities, symbolizing the precarious balance between the English and native peoples. Meanwhile, new supply ships arrived from England, bringing craftsmen, laborers, and desperately needed provisions that allowed Jamestown to expand beyond its original fort, with crude homes, a storehouse, and a small church marking the beginnings of a fledgling settlement. And in London, the Virginia Company issued a charter allowing settlers to elect representatives, planting the first seeds of self-rule in America, even as investors demanded profits and reports of gold, which remained elusive. Despite small successes, hardship persisted, disease continued to take its toll, hunting parties struggled, and food shortages threatened daily survival. Yet the colony endured because some men, inspired by Smith, and by the small victories of planting crops and trading for corn, refused to give in to despair, And slowly, Jamestown began to feel less like a desperate outpost and more like a community struggling to stake its claim in the New World. By the spring of 1608, the settlement had survived its first brutal year, its population still fragile, but its foundations laid for growth. Yet the departure of John Smith in 1609, due to a gunpowder accident, left Jamestown vulnerable once more, as his leadership had been a shield against disorder, starvation, and native retaliation, and as more settlers arrived, bringing with them inexperience and unrealistic expectations. The colony was poised to enter an even darker period, facing famine and attacks that would test whether Jamestown would survive at all. In this season of struggle, the men and women who had arrived expecting wealth were forced to learn the harshest lessons of survival cooperation, hard labor, and careful diplomacy, laying the groundwork for a settlement that would endure against nearly impossible odds and demonstrating that hope alone was never enough. Only courage, discipline, and a willingness to adapt could transform Jamestown from a fragile dream into the first foothold of English America. The winter of 1609-1610 would go down in history as Jamestown's darkest hour, known as the Starving Time, when the colony teetered on the brink of extinction, and every day became a battle for survival as frost and disease swept through the fort and surrounding settlement, reducing 500 settlers to fewer than 60 survivors by spring, as starvation forced desperate men to eat rats, snakes, roots, and even boiled leather from their shoes, with some turning to cannibalism to survive, while dysentery, malaria, and typhoid ran rampant through the crowded, unsanitary conditions, corpses filling shallow graves around the palisade and poisoning what little water remained. The absence of strong leadership after John Smith's departure left the colonists disorganized and fearful, unable to cultivate crops, hunt effectively, or maintain defensive outposts, while outside the Powhatan Confederacy, angered by English expansion and broken promises, cut off supplies and harassed anyone who ventured beyond the walls, making survival a gamble with death at every turn. And yet, even in the midst of despair, the colonists clung to life, driven by stubborn will, fleeting hope, and the knowledge that abandoning Jamestown meant surrendering to the unknown Atlantic voyage back to England. In May 1610, just as the remaining settlers prepared to leave the fort for good, a sight appeared on the horizon: 3 English ships under Lord de la Warr, carrying food and reinforcements and orders to restore discipline, arriving like salvation to turn the tide of survival. Yet even with new supplies, Jamestown's recovery was fragile. As disease persisted, tensions with the Powhatan never fully subsided, and the memory of the mass deaths haunted every surviving colonist. Amid this chaos, John Rolfe began experimenting with a new crop, tobacco, which offered a lifeline for trade and a future for the struggling colony, while the capture of Pocahontas in 1613 and her eventual marriage to Rolfe temporarily eased hostilities with the natives, ushering in a period known as the Peace of Pocahontas, though the peace was shallow and did little to erase the scars of violence and starvation. The Starving Time became a brutal lesson. Jamestown would not survive on ambition alone, nor on dreams of gold. It would require ingenuity, resilience, and diplomacy with the people who had lived on this land for centuries. Every decision, from planting crops to negotiating with Powhatan, carried weight. Every failure could mean death. By the end of this winter, the survivors had learned that the New World was no friendly garden, but a harsh, unforgiving wilderness, where only those willing to endure disease, hunger, and the relentless uncertainty of life on the frontier could hope to see Jamestown endure. And this period of extreme suffering became the crucible that forged the colony's resilience, teaching that survival in America required more than courage. It demanded adaptation, determination, and a willingness to confront the reality of a world that had no mercy for the unprepared. As Jamestown began to recover from the Starving Time, hope emerged in the form of tobacco. John Rolfe's new crop that promised wealth and a lifeline for the struggling colony. Yet the very company that had sent settlers across the Atlantic. the Virginia Company of London, soon revealed itself as a source of betrayal, demanding ever increasing exports of tobacco while insisting settlers expand plantations instead of focusing on growing essential food, a decision that returned hunger to the fort despite the promise of prosperity and led to resentment as new waves of inexperienced immigrants arrived, many unprepared for the brutal reality of life in Virginia, succumbing to disease, starvation, and conflict with the Powhatan, leaving survivors to wonder if the London investors valued human life at all. Meanwhile, tensions with the Powhatan Confederacy escalated as the expansion of tobacco fields encroached on native lands, fueling anger and leading to violent confrontations. In 1602, when a coordinated attack killed over 300 colonists, nearly a third of Jamestown's population, demonstrating that the settlers' fragile foothold in the New World was always dependent on delicate diplomacy, yet undermined by greed and mismanagement from afar. The settlers who had endured the horrors of famine now faced a new challenge, surviving the consequences of decisions made hundreds of miles away by men who had never seen the land, never lifted an axe, and never felt the bite of winter mosquitoes. And while some leaders tried to protect their people, the reality remained that Jamestown's survival had little to do with London's promises and everything to do with the resilience, ingenuity, and stubborn will of the colonists themselves. The Virginia Company's failures forced the Crown to intervene, and in 1624, King James I revoked the company's charter, making Virginia a royal colony. Yet the damage had been done. Jamestown had been shaped by exploitation, greed, and the harshest lessons of survival, leaving a bitter legacy for those who had risked everything to build a settlement that was meant to bring glory and profit to distant investors. Despite the betrayal, Jamestown endured, and its settlers learned to navigate the precarious balance of labor, diplomacy, and profit, realizing that their survival depended on community, strategic alliances, and relentless effort rather than the hollow promises of investors across the ocean. This era of mismanagement also sowed the seeds for both political and social structures in Virginia, from land grants to the beginnings of representative governance in the House of Burgesses, demonstrating that even betrayal and misrule could inadvertently shape the future of English America as the colony adapted, endured, and learned to rely on its own strength, setting the stage for an evolving society in the New World, built on the courage and sacrifices of those who survived the worst mismanagement London could offer. Jamestown's story was no longer just about survival. It was about learning from betrayal, rising above external greed, and laying foundations that would support the growth of English America for generations to come. By the 1620s, Jamestown had transformed from a desperate, swamp-bound fort into the beating heart of English Virginia, its fields flourishing with tobacco, the very crop that had saved the colony from collapse, and its fort expanding into a small but growing town where settlers planted homes, churches, and storehouses. Yet the legacy of Jamestown was far more than agriculture or commerce, for in 1619 two events occurred that would shape the future of America. The establishment of the Virginia House of Burgesses, the first representative assembly in the New World, where free Englishmen gathered to debate, vote, and lay the foundations of democracy, and the arrival of the first enslaved Africans, brought against their will, marking the beginning of a system of forced labor that would leave a dark and lasting mark on the colony and the nation to come. While the settlement prospered, it never forgot the price paid for survival. The memories of famine, disease, and violence lingered, a constant reminder that Jamestown had been carved out of a harsh and unforgiving wilderness, sustained by the courage, endurance, and resilience of settlers who had endured the starving time, attacks from the Powhatan Confederacy, and betrayal from the Virginia Company, proving that hope and determination could transform even the most desperate conditions into a foothold for a new society. Over time, settlers moved inland to more fertile lands, new towns arose, and the capital eventually shifted to Williamsburg, Yet Jamestown's name remained immortalized as the birthplace of English America, a place where experimentation, struggle, and survival had given rise to institutions, agriculture, and social structures that would echo for centuries. The legacy of Jamestown is therefore dual. It was both a story of resilience and survival against impossible odds, and a cautionary tale about exploitation, conflict, and the cost of colonization. As English settlers learned to navigate diplomacy with native peoples, manage labor, and establish governance in a foreign land, all while leaving lasting consequences for those who had lived there long before their arrival. Jamestown's endurance demonstrated that colonies could thrive through adaptation, leadership, and courage, and it set the stage for further expansion across North America, influencing the growth of English settlements from Virginia to New England. Its survival, against starvation, disease, and mismanagement, created the blueprint for English colonization, combining hard labor, trade, and governance, and even in decline. Jamestown's influence persisted, its story passed down as the first chapter in the saga of America, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, human determination could sow the seeds of a nation, turning a fragile outpost into a lasting symbol of ambition, resilience, and the beginnings of a new world. Jamestown survived against impossible odds, starvation, disease, attacks, and betrayal, but its story did not end there. From this fragile swampy outpost, the first seeds of English America were sound representative government, trade, and a society built on resilience and courage. Yet its legacy is complicated, marked by the arrival of enslaved Africans and the displacement of native peoples, a reminder that history is never simple. Jamestown stands as a symbol of human endurance, ambition, and the high cost of building a new world. The colony that nearly failed became the foundation for a nation, proving that even in the harshest conditions, survival, determination, and hope can change the course of history forever.